Hi, namaskar. Welcome to another edition of the Vedic Review. And today I'm going to introduce another text that's still a little close to my path, but definitely not something I have a direct experience with. However, I do have a lot of reading that this particular author and this path. It's another kind of modern Shaktipat path with pretty deep roots, but a little different take on things, but nonetheless some very interesting writing that's probably under the radar of more popular sects in this book. However, a lot of people that I talk to and discuss in different circles, anybody who's read this book, which is it's actually a series of 3 different books called Churning of the Heart, Volume 1, 2, and 3, have been really deeply moved, deeply touched, and have really gotten a lot out of this series. And so this series was written by a guru or lineage holder of Swami Shivom, and he passed not too long ago. I don't know the exact year, but he was fairly contemporary, and he took on the teachings from his own guru, Swami Vishnu Ji Maharaj, otherwise affectionately called Maharaj Sri, throughout this book and throughout the text. And and so this series envelops Swami Shivom Tirth's experiences. He was a householder, he was a common man, very spiritual throughout his life, and when he was a little older, he did eventually go to his guru's ashram, and this series details him going to the ashram and eventually taking over this lineage from his guru, and details his guru's passing, and this whole series of events leading through that whole kind of transformation and process. So it's a pretty extensive series being told in 3 volumes, but it gives a lot of details and a lot of ins and outs within the spiritual path. And so, this first volume is primarily him coming to the ashram, dealing with devotees, and as the series progresses, it gets deeper into his story and his unfoldment with his guru, getting into all sorts of interesting stories. His guru had a lot of access in the subtle planes and tells all sorts of interesting stories about communing with subtle masters, and even gets into some bits about ancient Egypt and some of the spiritual paths from there, actually, which I haven't really come across a lot in other Indian kind of texts. But he talks about the high nature of the beings there, and a certain higher being from Egypt that he would interact with. And so it's got a lot of interesting points like that you don't often see. But one of the really novel things, or one of the most interesting things that I find in this series, is that it's told from a disciple's point of view. So a lot of times when we're reading spiritual memoirs, it seems to either be these stories of these great enlightened sages with masterful control over the forces, which this text does get into, because it gets into his dealings with his guru, who was very high being, but we often see these kind of memoir pieces of individuals on a path, and with different forms of death. But in this text, it's kind of a combination of both, because Swami Shivom Tirth, he was a householder, but he was also in the process of taking over a path, and so there was a lot of conflict that came up in him, and there was a lot of questioning and doubting and all these other things that come on the spiritual path, as well as a lot of humility. And I think that's really one of the strongest hallmarks about this book, is just the intense humbleness, the intense humility that that the author brings to it, that he really shows that's essential on the path, and not getting caught up in the endless array of Maya and squabbles and debacles and everything else that kind of gets thrown at us, especially when we start getting involved in a spiritual path. And if you get in with a teacher, like a more community of spiritual seekers, there's still egos around, there's still problems, there's still issues to be addressed. And so he really shows a way to just try to not how to not be affected by all that, to really keep focused on the sadhana, on the teachings, he keeps going back to his guru's words, keeps answering his guru, asking his guru's questions, getting clarifications, to not get so tangled up in that. And because of this, after some time, it can get almost daunting and laborious with how this humbleness can turn into I don't know how to put it exactly, but it's I don't want to say depressing, but it's like, wow, the path is long, and it's hard. And, and he really brings that reality. It's not this new age take on spirituality. It's not all peace and laugh and giggles, he really shows, the title, Churning of the Heart, he shows that churning that has to take place to really uproot all the samskaras, all the vasanas, all those tendencies. He's really lays it out and gives a really honest portrayal of what it takes, and what a spiritual practitioner, a spiritual discipline is undergoing as they're really churning up those deep attachments and trying to let go of all the things we get caught up in. So it's identifiable for seekers who struggle on the path, and who don't feel like they're ever living up to the ideal. Here's someone who's close to a great being and who took on that great being's teachings and path within the world. Yet, he's showing how human he is. He's showing how it's okay to struggle. And the way it's done within this series, throughout the series, is mainly, it's just a series of small stories told throughout on different topics. And so, he kept some journals, I believe, while he was at the ashram and interfacing with his guru, but a lot of it is from memory. And so it's him remembering all these little teachings, all these stories, all these historical accounts. And so each chapter is a few pages to maybe 10 pages. So it's these little kind of snippets on specific topics. And so while you could start at the first book and continue on to the third to get a kind of a chronological perspective, it's not definitely necessary. This is a kind of book you can pick up, open up to a chapter, look at a topic that you're interested in, and use it as a daily reading, or something you check in from time to time, or you need reminders, or you can read all the way through. And I've used it in both ways. When I first got it, I was like, wow, this is great. And then I got all three and read through the whole series. But then recently, I've been revisiting it because there's so much in there, and so many teachings and little hints in the sadhana. So now sometimes when I go on retreat, I'll bring the series, and I'll literally just open up to a page, and there will be something there that I was reflecting on that I needed some clearance or guidance in. So it's worked like that for me too, where I get spot on kind of some insight into the process I'm going in during the time. And so it's both the first volume as well as the other two volumes, if you want to pick them up. If you like the first one, you'll love the other two. So if you didn't like the first one, don't go on to the other two. But I found this book very useful. Once again, too, it is kind of a modern path. I think they're a little more off the radar. They're more based within India. Some people close to our path has brought out Swami Shivom to the U.S. in the past a few times before he passed, and so there might be some disciples floating around here. I'm not totally clear on who the new holder is, but that practice was passed on to someone else, and so the practice does carry on. But if you read some of these they have a lot of other he wrote a lot of other texts too, which maybe I'll look at sometime in the future. But one of them is, it talks about, the birth of their own, or the resurgence of their own kind of lineage out of the shadows of, little local tradition and, saints nobody's ever heard of coming up, bubbling through the surface. He's wrote a nice commentary on the Guru Gita and a few other kind of texts, as well as his own gurus written. The gurus in this lineage have written some good texts on Shaktipat as well, and just energy and whatnot. So definitely a little more of I would say maybe some scholarly tradition there, but lots of good stuff to look into. And I'll leave a link below to if you want to check it out and get in touch with this book, this text. And once again, if you have questions on the book, I can share what little I know about it. Any details on there. And thanks for listening. And let me know if there's something you want me to look at. And hope you're well. Namaskar.